In this video, we're going to talk about how to balance chemical equations. This is a quick and easy method that will work for any chemical. So here's the equation we're going to work with. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line that divides the reactant side of the equation from the product side of the equation. So I'm just going to put a line right down the middle. And I'm going to list all the different elements that are on each side of the equation. They're going to be the same elements, but I'm just going to list them. We have iron, that's Fe, sulfur, this is oxygen, we have potassium, another oxygen, which we'll just group with this oxygen, and hydrogen. So I'm going to list those elements. And then over on the product side over here, we're going to list the same elements. And now we're going to count up the elements. So I'm going to count up all the elements over here on the reactant side. And so I have 2 irons. So that little 2 tells me that there's 2 irons there. And so put a 2 there. If I count up the sulfurs, I have 1 here inside the brackets, but I'm multiplying everything inside these brackets by 3. So I actually have 1 times 3. So I have 3 sulfur. And then we have just 1 potassium. So there's the K is potassium. We have 1 hydrogen all by itself there. And then the last thing to count here is the oxygen. So there's 4 oxygen inside these brackets. We're multiplying that by 3, so there's really 12 oxygen here. Plus that 1 is 13 oxygens. Now let's count up the other side. So we have just the 1 iron here. We have 2 potassium. So here's our K with the 2 next to it. So it's 2 potassiums. We just have 1 sulfur. There's sulfur, just 1 of them. We have 3 hydrogens, so here's the 1 hydrogen inside the brackets, and we're multiplying that by 3, so there's 3 hydrogens. And then finally we have 3 oxygens over here, so 1 oxygen times 3, plus these 4 oxygens over here, so that's 7 oxygens. Now the goal of balancing is that we get these numbers to equal for each of these elements. So both of those should be the same, both of those should be the same, and so on. So that's our goal. Here are the steps to be able to reach that goal. These are steps to balancing chemical equations. The first step is that we're first going to balance the metals. We're going to make sure the metals balance each other. So as I'm looking at this equation, I have 2 metals. I have iron and potassium. I'm going to start by getting those numbers to equal. Then I'm going to move on to the nonmetals, except for hydrogen and oxygen. The only thing I have other than hydrogen and oxygen that's a nonmetal is sulfur. Finally, I'll balance hydrogen, then oxygen. So you see I listed them in the order that I'm going to follow these steps. So how do we go about changing these numbers? I have 2 irons here, I have 1 iron here, and I want that to be 2. I want these to match. The one thing I cannot do is I can't change these subscripts. So that little 2, I can't just simply put a little 2 in there. These things right here are set in stone. What I can do is I can change the coefficients, and that's numbers in front of these chemical compounds. So right here, there's nothing there, but since there's nothing there, we just assume a 1 is there in front of each of these. So I just have 1 of each of those molecules. Now in reality, that's not what it would look like. We got to change these amounts of each of these molecules, or these compounds I should say, because we want these numbers to all balance each other. So here's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to put a 2 right in front of that iron hydroxide. All right, so I'm going to put that 2 there. That's going to change not only the amount of iron, it's going to multiply everything here by 2. It's really like I have 2 of these compounds, the whole thing. So it's going to say that I have 2 irons, but it's also going to change the amount of oxygen and hydrogen. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this 1 to a 2, because now I have 2 of them. And then I need to go about and check, well, what else did I change when I put that 2 there? Right here, the oxygen, I had 3 of them, right, because it's 3 times everything inside the brackets. And then I'm multiplying that by 2, so I really have 6 oxygens here. I can't forget about these ones over here, so that's 6 plus 4, so I have changed the number of oxygen from 7 to 10. That's the 6 plus the 4. I also changed the number of hydrogens. So over here was hydrogen. There were 3 of them. I'm multiplying that by 2, and so I'm going to change this 3 now to a 6. Now, I should have mentioned this earlier, but make sure you use a pencil when you're putting in these subscripts, because this could change. We're going to keep on adding coefficients here, so we might have to change this later. So use a pencil, because we might have to change that. We'll see what happens. Now that the irons are balanced here, remember, step one is I want to balance the metals. The other metal is potassium. I need to balance this as well. So I'm going to look on this side. I have 1. Here's KOH. I'm going to put a 2 in front of that. So we're going to change this number from 1 to now 2. And while I did that, I changed the amount of oxygen and hydrogen. So I need to account for that as well. First, we'll start with the hydrogen. There was 1. I'm multiplying that by 2. So now I have 2 hydrogens here. And I also changed the amount of oxygen. There used to just be 1 oxygen here. I multiplied that by 2. So there's 2 oxygens here in this area. Over here, I had 12. So that's a total of 14 oxygens now. Change that as well. Now I can double check my metals. Metals are balanced. Now I can move on to the non-metals, except for hydrogen and oxygen. I'm going to leave those till the end. So now we're at the sulfur. 3 sulfurs on this side. I only have 1 here. So I am going to add a 3 where I see sulfur. So here's the only spot I see the sulfur. So I'm going to put a 3 right here. Now it's going to triple all of this stuff in here. So there's only 1 sulfur in the compound, but I'm multiplying that by 3. So I'm going to change this from 1 to 3, but I've also changed a lot of other things here, so I want to check what I did. There were just 2 potassiums here, but I've multiplied that by 3. Now I'm at 6 potassiums on this side. Looks like we're throwing things off from what we just did. It looks counterproductive, but it's not. Hang on, we're going to get there. And I've changed the oxygen as well. There used to be 4 oxygens right here. Multiplying that by 3, so that's 12. And then over here I have 6. So we're at 18 oxygens on this side now. So I'm going to change this number. And I'm going to check here to see my sulfurs are balanced. My irons are still balanced, but now my potassium is not. So I'm going to go back. I don't want to move on to the step. I always want to go back to the beginning and make sure, are the metals still balanced? They're not, so I'm going to make sure I get those balanced before I move further. So I'm going to have to change some numbers here, so let's take a look at what we need to do. We have 6 potassiums and 2 over here, so if I look, there's only 1 potassium in this compound. So I'm going to change this 2, I'm going to change it to a 6. So I'll put a 6 here, and that's going to give me 6 potassiums. So I'm going to cross out that 2 because now I have 6, but I've changed the amount of oxygen again. So I have 1 oxygen times 6, so that's 6 oxygens, plus over here, there's 12, so 12 plus 6, that's 18. I'll change this number now to 18. I'm going to check the hydrogens. Right here is the only place I find hydrogen. There is just 1 hydrogen times 6, and so I'm going to change this number to 6, and now let's go through and check. Irons match, potassium matches, sulfur matches, hydrogen matches, and oxygen matches. This is our completed balanced chemical equation. So I just had to add a 6 there, a 3 there, and a 2 there. If you follow these steps, the beauty of these 3 steps is that generally, just like what happened here, the hydrogen and oxygen just simply balance themselves. That happens a lot of times when you follow these steps. And so this is our completed balanced chemical equation. Thanks for watching. That's a simple, quick method of balancing chemical equations.